Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Now more than ever, digital marketers and retailers have a wealth of first-party data on consumers, or at least they should, different podcast. However, providing an authentic and unique e-commerce experience for audiences continues to prove difficult. On this episode of the Voice of Retail, I'm joined by Frank Ferris, the CEO and founder of XGen AI. We talk about the chronic pains of contemporary digital retail marketing and the challenges of effectively and efficiently targeting potential customers. Learn about the innovative workings of XGen AI and how Frank and his team had to reinvent the wheel to get the cutting-edge platform they run today. Their AI drives autonomous and real-time product recommendations with the goal of providing a true one-to-one digital shopping experience that is as dynamic and as unique as each individual customer. Let's explore the potential that lies at the intersection of retail and artificial intelligence.
So for us, we took it a step further by saying, hey, every time someone does something, we're going to send that directly to our AI engine, and we're going to get the AI engine's prediction in real time.
Let's listen in now. Frank, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Michael, thanks. Really appreciate you having us on here, and I'm doing great. And yourself?
I'm very good, thanks. And it's great to meet you, so to speak, virtually. We have a mutual friend, Neil Weitzman, who introduced us, the great Neil Weitzman. So thanks. Shout out to Neil, and looking forward to learning all about your business. Now, where am I talking to you? Where am I reaching you today?
Currently, I'm in Tampa. Just got back from Europe 48 hours ago.
All right, just getting accustomed. Is that where your company is based? Is that where you were based? And talk about that a bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're based in the United States. Obviously, we're a U.S. company. We have a lot of traction in Europe, specifically with luxury. So it's dragging me out there a lot these days.
All right, interesting. Well, we'll get into all that, but let's say we've kind of jumped in, but let's take a step back. Tell me about yourself, your professional journey, and your role at XGen AI.
Yeah, perfect, great. So I grew up in England. I have always been, tinkering in computers my whole life. From building computers at a young age with my friends, hacking together overclocking machines to play video games and all kinds of fun stuff. Mm-hmm. And that career path really took me into a hardware journey for many years of my life. Then kind of system architecture and design for actually live shows. I was in that for many years, doing broadcasts like the NFL draft from a tech perspective, some other cool, fun, exciting events. And
Live Without a Net, that stuff actually, I spent a bunch of years at the Shopping Channel, which is like a QVC or HSN. And people just don't, generally, even in the tech world, the broadcast world, appreciate, broadcasting for that long, for that live. Wow. There's a lot of technology that happens, and it's quite impressive. So that's great. That's a great background for it.
Yeah, it's you're 100% right. It's high demand for sure. No room for error, obviously. Yeah.
If that goes down, there's no take two, right?
Yeah, that's right. You're gone.
you're gone. You're off the air. The money's gone. You're gone. Bye bye. Anyway, so I'm sorry I derailed you there a little bit. All right, so hardware and keep going. Tell me how you got into what you do. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. My sister actually, I have her to thank for my current path. She runs a beauty salon chain in Australia, and she decided to release her own product line, manufacture all these products, really high quality, organic, and they took off in the salon line. And so she started to kind of push on the e-commerce route. And she was having all these difficulties selling on Amazon and online and various other platforms. And I was going through a change in my life, transition to a different location. I was like, hey, let me jump in and see if I can help. And we managed to increase the performance and revenue of those products, thousands of percent in about 6 months. It really took off pretty heavily. And that really got me heavily involved in e-commerce and, retail performance and diving into all things associated to that. And that was the genesis of XGen.
All right. Well, and tell me all about XGen. What's the origin story, when it started? You give me some background, but tell me about origin story, your scope. You're based in the U.S. You're doing something fun and interesting with e-commerce. So take us through it.
Sure. So XGen AI was kind of born out of this concept of, I had a very unique approach, Michael, to what I considered as, an e-commerce user should, the experience should be. I feel like so much of it is focused around like crush selling the individuals. You see it in like ad retargeting, right? Like you jump onto something, you see a product, and it's like following you around across all your apps. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Relevant or not, right? Just based on the fact you may be in close proximity to a product or whatever happened, right?
Exactly. It's kind of the mentality, like if I'm a brand, it's like you must see my product and I'm going to show it to you until you crack. You know what I mean?
Until you say uncle, until you say mercy, I'm going to just,
Yeah, right. So I've never been a big fan of that kind of methodology. And to me, if you're going to sell a product, you need to service the customer, right? Like you need to understand what their needs and wants are. You need to understand that to the core, and you need to be able to drive the right product to that person and the right experience that matches what they're looking for. I'm a big fan of, if you're going to sell something, well, obviously you need to find the people that are interested in it. But when you do, you really need to approach it from a perspective of like, hey, how can we service you, right? As like the fundamental question. And mixed with the concept, kind of that fundamental hypotheses from day one, and blending it with this concept that I noticed that in high volume e-commerce, meaning lots of traffic, the tiniest changes would make, specific ones would make huge impact on the performance of the sales. So, taking that kind of philosophy, I ran forward and I started to look at, the subject of personalization, which, is obviously attempting to tailor the experience to a group of individuals, geo-based, location-based, whatever.
Yeah, at least try and gang tackle them, right? If you can't do one-to-one.
Yeah. It's like, hey, fast forward, a couple of decades, websites were like, one person for, one experience for every single person, right? And I have a funny analogy. I have many analogies, but this one's kind of funny. Is if Michael, if you launch a shoe brand, right, and you're sitting in a stadium and you have like 1 million people looking at you at the center of the stadium, you get up there, you hold up a couple of shoes, and you start yelling at everyone, "Buy this product!" Right? You're going to capture a certain portion of that audience, obviously, but ultimately, the potential you're missing out on is massive. And with the advent of personalization, it allowed you to go, well, first of all, semi-replicate yourself and then break the stadium into like seating groups. Like this is your, A chair range, and we're going to put someone that kind of understands a little bit about these people in front of them and pitch them a different product, right? And it really worked.
These are your red shoe fans, these are high heel fans, these are your sports fans, at least some way to what we would call segment or divide them up, right?
Exactly. You've got basic segmentation rolling. You've got some kind of user data coming in that you can use to trigger responses. Hey, these are Japan users. They have a penchant for buying certain products and certain price points, certain colors. Hey, we can kind of semi-craft a journey for them. You know what I mean? But the fundamental problem with this is it still bugged me, because if you look at it, it's like, well, hold up. If I'm sitting in one of those audience groups, why am I being treated the same as 10,000 people, right? So it's kind of the same problem as, the stadium. You just honestly made it a little bit more complicated, and kind of you 10x your complication, but you've, delivered a little bit more increase, but it's a dark path. It gets really complicated. You start to micro and macro segment. It does not end. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It can get very confusing and expensive. And you as you say, you wind up down a lot of rabbit holes. You get a 10x increase in complexity with a 1x increase in sales. The math doesn't work, right?
Exactly. And kind of fast forwarding it to like real world application, if you look at e-commerce teams from like big corporations down to like small startups, they don't have time, man. I mean, they are like, sales is everything to them. They're either under immense pressure financially or from their superiors. And you can't expect them to spend 3 months setting up a data strategy and a segmentation strategy and building the logic behind who sees what product and experience. It's not workable. Besides the fact that it's, unfortunately, technology's advanced far beyond that point at this day and age, right? So,
yeah.
So the advent of XGen AI was really, we took that problem and we said, what is the ultimate? What's like the knee plus ultra in this solution, right? And we came up with a concept, and And I'm not going to lie, it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done to build that system, right? The key points were, how do you treat an individual like an individual? How do you look at what they're doing, understand their needs and wants, look at their journey, and then drive not just a unique product to them, but a unique experience. Like if you were to walk into a luxury store, the ultimate luxury experience would be that store, digitally adapts to you. And the sales rep is looking at everything you're doing, has 30 years of sales knowledge to pull upon. And, you walk out of there with a bunch of stuff and you're like, that's actually what I came to look for. I feel happy. I'm good. I'm not being crush sold, etc.
Yeah. Right? There's a lot going on there, right? 3 simple questions, but they're very big questions right there. And the only question that you'd add to that as a 4th bonus question is the meaning of life. I mean, if you put those 4 together, you've really got, some pretty powerful questions, but a bit of a gnarly challenge, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, that category breaks down into several key problems, following on from that, like, well, what data do you need to do that, right? And in order to do that, people are used to reacting to data, meaning like if they pick up a red shoe, that equals in this segment a blue belt. And that's the logic that's fixed for the next month, right? But what people don't understand is that a shopper's mind doesn't work that way. It's changing instantaneously. It's being affected by the very thing that you're showing them, the experience. So, the data methodology, meaning the value you can pull out of the customer data, is you're not even tapping into like a decimal % of its potential. So again, it was like the amount of value you can drive from that is instrumental, but the problem is how do you do that, right? So how do you replicate 20 years of sales experience in a machine, basically, right? I mean, and if you look at this, like this hypothetical, super sophisticated sales associate in a luxury store, what are they ultimately doing? They're predicting, right? They're like, you pick up a red handbag, and it's a high price point, and they're kind of thinking, well, if he puts it down, I'm going to go for blah next. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it was a question of how to replicate that in a digital environment, which is incredibly cold and unforgiving, right?
Very efficient, but not much of, this is the challenge of e-commerce, right? It's very efficient, but it's not exactly a wonderful shopping experience all the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of follows along the same path as technology. Obviously, it's like you can build one store and invite the world to see it, which seems stupid, but in reality, that is the power of e-commerce, right? Mm-hmm. But the unforgiving nature of, if I have 10,000 SKUs up and the average customer time on site for me is like 1.5 minutes, the probability of me finding the right product is not even close to being accomplishable, right? So, in product discovery, it's like, well, we break it down to categories, we show, bestsellers and all this stuff, but it's all honestly just patchwork to the entire, it's like going into surgery with a baseball bat, the way I call it, right?
Yeah.
So the scalpel in that scenario became, well, how do we take each customer, leverage, years of data about this individual, look at exactly what they're doing in a real-time environment and adapt the experience only to that customer and exactly what they want to see, but predicting what their next move is going to be. And that's where the challenge, well, that is the challenge we decided to tackle. It was a painful period of my life, Michael. I'm not going to lie.
You probably should have started with the meaning of life and worked backwards. It might have been easier for you by the sounds of it.
I mean, in the beginning as a startup, we literally started in like a shed. Remember we used to sit on like milk crates and like yoga balls, right? It was ridiculous. And we were trying to put this thing together with like zero money. And so many times it got to a point where it's just like the technology, the backbone of technology, like the services and the servers and the processing power behind what we do is just not ready for this, right? But we found a way. We had to reinvent the wheel at every turn. And we came up with like a minimum viable product, an MVP that was like, hey, let's test it against like existing methodologies. And the results were, shockingly profound. And that was, we took it from there.
All right. Well, tell me about, let's pull that apart a little bit. So, lots of AI folks I talk to say they couldn't do what they do without kind of a cloud-based horsepower like servers. So you're probably using that, whether it's Google or AWS. Are you using one of those two services?
AWS, yes.
You're AWS, okay. So you're using the power of AWS to run this thing. Well, let's talk about this thing, this artificial intelligence. And it opens up this great conversation about what exactly is artificial intelligence versus clever programming versus learning.
Right.
And then I got a bunch of follow-up questions. But tell me exactly what your product does. So I'm a merchant, and what you've been describing is like, yep, tick in the box. I got those problems, and I'd love to do what I do better. How and in what way does your product help me?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, we take the customer data for its first party information, right? So we're a first party system. We take the first party data, we leverage that in real time to predict what set of variables are they most likely to engage with, right?
So before we go too far, just make sure we take the audience with us. Unpack first party data.
Oh yes, definitely. So obviously, customer owns a site. A client owns a site, shoe brand. Customers come to their site. They get the authorization directly from the customer to, the cookie opt-in, opt-out banner that everyone sees, to use that data to better service them, right? So that's first party versus third party, which is leverage, from other companies like, hey, I'm going to pull this data from Facebook users in order to advertise to them, et cetera, et cetera.
So this is actual customer behavior on your website. That's what everything, the platform of data, that's what it's all predicated on. Cool.
Yes, exactly. And we are huge proponents of customer privacy. So that was, it is a big challenge in the beginning to say, hey, how do you leverage just the customer data on site to gain these results?
Yeah.
And it's not an easy challenge.
Well, and the risk, I guess, is it gives you a slightly or sometimes a more than slightly incomplete picture from which you develop profiles, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And, AI is moving at such a fast pace, right? And it's like the challenges behind that are immense. And when you start to get into like cutting edge, like R&D and saying like, hey, we're going to look at every single relationship of this customer, all the elements about the product, the color, the size, all this stuff, and look at all these data points and drive an accurate prediction is already alone like quite complicated in a SaaS environment. Like, how do you replicate that for every single customer and make it effective?
Yeah.
But on top of that, we were like, we took it a step further. We're like, well, we're going to do, you could do that on a weekly basis, Michael, right? You could like cache the results to that prediction weekly for the customer. So their experience would update. It would look like real time, but it's not the intelligence, simply put, the intelligence is not updating in real time, right? Mm-hmm. So for us, we took it a step further by saying, hey, every time someone does something, we're going to send that directly to our AI engine, and we're going to get the AI engine's prediction in real time directly out of that and send it back to them all within under 100 milliseconds, right? So that was a large, challenging component to the system in the beginning. Ultimately, we can take any set of variables. Like we can take, so variables are, hey, you have a bunch of products, right? Or, hey, you have a bunch of content, or, we have all these different like sales banners or whatever variables you're dealing with that you're trying to test online, right? And we, our system enables our customers to basically just optimize the ideal set of variables to that customer multiple times a second. And if you really look at e-commerce, everyone's used to A/B testing, where it's like, hey, we're going to take a certain portion of the group, make a change, see what impact it made, wait for 2 to 3 weeks for it to hit statistical relevance and say, great, this is the change. It's going to go static to all of our customers. But if you really look at what we're doing, we're accomplishing that in real time for every single customer, right? So the way we look at it is you are optimizing the experience at absolute maximum to every single customer. So our concept of the future is that e-com teams and branding teams can focus simply on the products, having a better product, looking at product metrics, building better branding, getting involved in merchandising and more content for the site, and letting our engine optimize it individually.
And I've heard similar things about this, and it's not easy to do, that reorientation around metadata that fuels engines like yours, right? Predictive engines like yours. So now, okay, so I'm visiting a retailer site, and your engine is working in the background. What happens? Do I get taken to different places? Do I get different messages? Tell me the next step once your engine has decided that I'm going to be served certain things or taken in certain places. What happens then?
Yeah, definitely. So, you start interacting with the site. The what's happening is between our team and the customer, they have enabled locations on the site that are going to adapt to that customer, right? So that could come in the form of, your atypical recommendation carousel, or it could be like literally a dedicated, your wardrobe page, or your products for you page that they can click at any time, right? It's just like completely designed for them. So as they move throughout the site, this experience changes. They can go back to the same URL and it's going to look completely different. So, if you look at a customer's journey in like a sequential series of steps, every kind of step they take, the engine is crafting those specific locations on site to match exactly their needs. Ideally, if we had it our way, we would take a site and make a lot of it dynamic, not just certain locations, right? And we are working with some customers that do have a penchant for wanting to go that deep, which is very exciting to us, because the more you deploy, the more effective the site lift gets.
So let's talk about let's talk tech for a couple of minutes. So lots of retailers have sites. You mentioned you work with some luxury retailers, for example, in Europe. Maybe they're on a Shopify site. Maybe they're on Salesforce. Whatever. Are you platform agnostic? Do you sit on top? Talk about that.
Yeah, that's great. So we're definitely platform agnostic. We do have we built plugins for the top 5, right, to make it simple. But ultimately, yes, we're uninvasive. It's super easy to push in. We do treat integrations at the enterprise level uniquely, because everyone has different challenges, right? But the fundamental concept for us is that from a business perspective, integration needs to be literally as rapid as possible, right?
Yeah.
So if we give you our product, there's a bit of distrust in the industry, to tell you the honest truth.
The one line of code sales pitch. I've been pitched a few times.
Right?
It's one line of code. You'll be done by the end of the day.
And then comes the storm, right?
Yeah.
But we have spent a significant portion of our lives building systems that can truly integrate lightning fast. In fact, we stand by our word so strong that we actually will give the integration to the customer for free on a free trial at the enterprise level. It's like, hey, use the system for 4 weeks. We'll if it takes us a long time to integrate, it's just costing us. It's not costing you, right? So we're going to go to the customer and say, look, if we're going to run a test on the system, on an A/B test, you take 4 weeks. Or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever. And, your time commitment through approval of the deployment, through integration and setup, we're going to ask for 3 to 5 hours maximum of your time throughout this entire time period. That's our goal of what we shoot for with every customer.
So it's a pretty light integration. You sit on top of and work with all the big platforms or major platforms. I'm sure you'd have those details on your site. So great. One of the challenges I had in the stone age of trying to do this, I was in campaign management and CRM, is gifting. Gifting would always, as we started, we had a great loyalty program and we had millions of members in it, and we'd get lots of data. And 2 things would throw us off, actually. One would be gifting. In other words, I'm not looking for myself, so the recommendations were always slightly off, sometimes really off. And the other thing was understanding, in our particular case, the difference between parents and grandparents. And we figured out a hack for that. The hack was grandparents don't buy diapers for their kids, right? They go in and they buy other things. So we figured out just sitting around a table and figured that out. How do you think about those things? Like, the noise in the data, in other words, things that look like one thing but are actually another. How does your engine start to think through that use that fantastic horsepower and think through those challenges.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and it's funny because you hear about challenges like this in various shapes and forms, like all day, every day. You know what I mean? You know, back several years, you did have to respond to those with triggers, right? Like, if under this circumstance that happens, like you mentioned, smart programming, then do this, right? But ultimately, the way we approached it is we built models, meaning AI algorithms, in multiple forms that are designed, you know, and I'll give you a caveat. There has to be a minimum critical mass of monthly customer data, right? You can't do this. You know, for the smaller customers, we have to leverage more simplistic models. And that's one of the benefit of the XGen system is it's going to maximize the potential no matter how big your data set is, right? But for the bigger customers, we're running like hyper sophisticated models that will literally look at every possible pattern in that data that is imaginable. So if you think of a scenario that would apply, like, hey, this product works when you show it to this type of audience under this circumstance, that is not a true statement, because it is going to work for a certain portion of that audience, right? So the response to that is to say, first of all, make that decision at the individual level, and second of all, you know, if the model is doing its job, which it does, it will visualize that pattern, if that makes sense. Like the importance of that decision and the decision process of that, what you just mentioned, will be taken into account in the model's decision process.
So does it pull together all the behaviors from all the clients, of course not sharing any data anonymously, and kind of help push out those edge cases so that it just gets better? Is that kind of that gang tackling again, or the entourage effect? Is that happening?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very unique confidential approach to doing this in the back end, but ultimately, like, our key is leveraging a massive amount of customer data points, right, on the site, and then comparing those to everything we can possibly find about the product, right? And then when you start to look at stuff like time of year, time of day, and all the other variables that go into this, you can start to see, like, we've seen patterns that just blew customers' minds. Like, hey, by the way, this is the decision process of the engine. Here's a quick summary of it. And they're like, wait, we've never even seen this before, yet it is occurring, right? And the engine, capable of extracting that at each user's level and showing the product, it generates instrumental lift. I mean, we have, you know, our batting average is anywhere from like 8 to 25% incremental A/B tested revenue lift month over month, right? This is like empirical, like undeniable revenue lift, and you know, that's instrumental, right? And this is on an optimized experience. This is not some, you know, crappy, you know, Shopify quick build that's going to require like months of, you know, optimization, right?
Right. Now you've the last question for you. You've been talking to a lot of retailers, sounds like, around the world, and what are the retailers, you know, what do they get wrong in those meetings when they think about AI and they think of your kind of predictive power and your product? What are the kind of the myths or things that you go, hey, that actually used to be the case but isn't the case, or that was never the case, or that might be the case in 20 years? Like, what are the kind of one or two things that come up most often?
Yeah, no, I love this question, right? Because, you know, I deal with a lot, and I think that I think first and foremost is, you know, I can understand a non-understanding of what's actually happening. It is complicated, right? You know, there's so many things to understand. And Michael, you get it, but there's so much that goes into understanding what's actually occurring, right?
Yeah. Well, if all the merchants understood it, they wouldn't need great vendors like you, right? I mean, they can't be great at everything. This is the wonderfulness of, you know, people like yourself who really dig in and figure these things out, right? Yeah,
exactly. And when you talk to these guys, our biggest challenge in the beginning was like actually connecting the dot between the technology and what's going on. Like, and we had a big issue because we would tell people personalization, but that word has a bad taste to some customers. Like, oh, we tried X platform and it didn't do anything for us, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, and on top of that, there's a lot of non-transparent, I would put this delicately, non-transparency in the industry, specifically in SaaS, which I'm talking against my own industry here, which I shouldn't do. Yeah. But there's a lot of like distrust about performance in this industry. And it's because of the methodologies. We just published an article on Forbes about this a couple of weeks ago. But the way that performance is gauged is not technically trustworthy in multiple circumstances, right? So we often have to educate the customer on the different testing methodologies and like, hey, using that way is not really showing you what's actually occurring, right? So we have to educate people. And, the first thing we'll tell a customer is like, hey, we're going to run an empirical A/B test to reach statistical relevance. We'll validate that on a third-party system for you. And, ultimately, we should not be working together if we can't generate you lift. You're spending money not for a feature, but for the result of generating more revenue, right? No matter how anyone cuts it about, feature-rich and this and that, it's not the point. The point is e-com teams need performance, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, and that search for incremental revenue versus, it's this XY axis, how much effort and cost versus how much incremental lift. So,
exactly.
That's just kind of what it's all about. Well, it's been great. It's a great introduction. Now, we've talked about a lot of stuff. You talked about articles in Forbes. You talked about, I imagine you've got different case studies and all kinds of different things. Where can people go to learn more?
XGen AI. Pretty simple.
Oh, very simple. And you're a LinkedIn guy, or what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I am. I'm a LinkedIn fanatic. Frank Pharisee.
All right. Very good. Well, listen, Frank, thanks so much for joining me on The Voice of Retail. Great conversation. I wish you continued success and by the sounds of it, safe travels as well. And once again, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Michael, a real pleasure, and it's always awesome to talk to someone knowledgeable in the space. I really enjoy it. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.